Hey, what I want to talk about in this video is imposter syndrome. And I want to give you 5 tips to skip the dip. And that is the emotional roller coaster, those dips in your emotional roller coaster when you're an entrepreneur, so that it doesn't feel so heavy, so that you don't give up too early. I don't want you to be another statistic. I don't want you to be one of the 50% of businesses that fails in the first 5 years. I want you to be an entrepreneur. I want you to love it, and I want you to love your life, but it almost didn't happen for me. And I know the same thing happens to a lot of other people. Whether you've already started the business or you're already in it, this is applicable to you. So I'm going to take you back about 4 years ago. I started kind of side hustling, creating content on YouTube. I was a marketing director at a company. I didn't love that situation. I just felt like there was more for me. I didn't like the idea of being controlled by somebody else. So that's like, you got to show up and sit in this box these hours. You got to work on these projects with these people. This is what we're shooting for, blah, blah, blah. Hammer these nails and just keep hammering them. I just kind of felt like a monkey on a string, right? Like it was just a puppeteer controlling my life. I hated that feeling. And I was like, I need out of this, all right? So one of the things that I somehow stumbled into was this networking group for online business owners. And it was a cool group. And I noticed that in the Facebook group is where it started, is that there was a lot of people that seemed like they were pretty successful business owners. And they were in places that I wanted to be where I wasn't quite yet. And the person who started the group, luckily for me, decided to change things up in 2020 because obviously we couldn't meet in person. They did this annual conference that I had never been to. And frankly, I wouldn't have gone to because I would have felt like an imposter. All right. But he said, is there anybody in the group that has expertise in a certain area that they'd like to share at a virtual conference because we're switching it up this year? And I remember I read this in my office when I was at my day job. And I was sitting there thinking about it. And I was like, I don't know, like maybe I could do, Eric, just do it. And I just said, sure, I know a lot about YouTube. I could speak to the group. So the cool thing about it was I was able to actually be in the conference, which cost like whatever, $1,000 to go attend this thing. And I was able to be a fly on the wall and listen to the other presenters. Cool, because they were really informative, really smart people. And I felt like I was learning so much about online business. But scary because as I was sitting there, this feeling just started coming up inside of me. And I was like, oh gosh, oh gosh, oh gosh. And what it was imposter syndrome. I was like, these people are so stinking smart. I can't believe that I'm even in this room. And I can't believe that they're letting me even speak to these people to tell them what I know. And when it got to my point and my turn in the presentation to tell people about YouTube and how the platform works, I almost couldn't speak. I was so overwhelmed with imposter syndrome. It was wild. Now, the really cool thing about that is I managed to get through that experience and people were like, oh, that's super helpful. Thanks for that information and that advice. And I got really deep into that group to the point that I go out and I visit 2 times a year for annual conferences. It's called Rhodium Group, Rhodium Weekend, I should say. But the neat thing is when I got to those conferences, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with other people who were like, yeah, I felt like an imposter here every single time I come into these doors. Then I was like, oh, there's a bunch of people showing up with massive amounts of imposter syndrome. And a lot of these people are very successful already. And I was like, that's really interesting that we're all having the same experience. So why don't we break down 5 tips on how to deal with imposter syndrome? Because in that moment, if I never actually took that leap of faith and went left instead of right at that fork of the road, I don't think I would be here making content. I don't think I would be working from home when I want to work. I don't think I would have the lifestyle that I want to have, all of these things, because I wasn't overtaken by my imposter syndrome. So what I want to talk about are cognitive biases. All right. So there is a list of these on Wikipedia. I will have this in the description for you if you want to check any of these out that we're talking about. But basically what this is it's a psychological aspect that all of us have these cognitive biases that a lot of times aren't even correct, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm the only person feeling or experiencing this thing right now, when it's like, yeah, most of the people in the room are feeling the same thing. So when you start to realize, like I did in that moment, when I was like, wow, all these other people had imposter syndrome here. It wasn't just me. It takes the pressure down a little bit of feeling like a fraud. All right. So that is what this video is designed to do, is help you to not feel like a fraud as an entrepreneur so that you can keep pushing forward and keep being consistent to your commitment of becoming an entrepreneur. So first one I want to talk about is negativity bias. So this is also known as the negativity effect, and is a cognitive bias that even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative nature, e.g. unpleasant thoughts, emotions, or social interactions, harmful traumatic events, have a greater effect on one's psychological state and processes than neutral or positive things. Now, if you recall, if you watch my other video, this graphic may look familiar. So on the left-hand side, we have the psychopath who is just kind of on this easy kind of emotional roller coaster going up. And the right-hand side, we have the anxious entrepreneur that is on this crazy emotional ride. The thing is when you're an entrepreneur, you have to understand that there's the negativity effect. And that is when things aren't going well, those things have a greater psychological impact on you than when things are going well. So this is important to understand, because when you end up in one of these troughs, one of these little valleys down here, all right, that is when you have to remember that this feels worse than it is. And I forget what the saying is, but there's a saying of like, you know, it's never as good as it seems and it's never as bad as it seems. That's basically what we're trying to get to right now. The negativity effect, that things are not as bad as they seem. In your perception, they may seem awful, but that is because we are wired as humans to focus on the negativity. Second thing I want to talk about, bandwagon effect. You probably see where this one's going, but what this is that this is more specifically a cognitive bias by which public opinion or behaviors can alter due to particular actions and beliefs rallying amongst the public. I mentioned this one for people that are interested in starting a business, right? So if you're looking at starting a business, it's really difficult to get started sometimes because you're leaving the herd. And that herd could be your own family. It could be your fellow coworkers, whatever it may be. Let's say you have a job and you have 20 people that you work with and you like a lot of them. It's hard to leave that herd to go start and be an entrepreneur. Now, if inside of your family systems, like maybe you have a parent, an in-law, a cousin, a wife, a husband, kids even, that are like, no, don't do that. Like, that's risky. Don't do that. Everybody needs to be an entrepreneur. You see the same thing for going to college. Like, got to go to college. Why? Everybody goes to college. Okay, like, I guess I go to college. That is the bandwagon or herd effect. So if you're thinking about getting started with something, or you're an entrepreneur and you're already going and you're trying to maybe zig when others are zagging, understand that it is normal to feel that pressure, that not everybody else is in your corner at that moment, but also know that that adds to your imposter syndrome. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm the only person doing this, and oh, this is so hard. Well, it's true. That is, again, a wiring that we have developed, a cognitive bias that we want to stick with the herd. And if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, there are moments in time when you have to leave the herd to do the right thing for you. All right, let's go to the next one here. So the next one I want to talk about is loss aversion. I don't like the definition they give here on Wikipedia, but basically what it is that people are 2.5 times more motivated by the fear of loss than the opportunity of gain. So when you're thinking about loss aversion, basically what it is like, let's imagine that you're gambling and you're spending $100 on a bet. And maybe it's just flipping a quarter. And when you win versus when you lose, it feels 2.5 times worse, more worse when you lose than when you win. And that's because we are just so adverse to loss. All right. So this is also a cool thing to understand, because as an entrepreneur, there are times that you can zig when other entrepreneurs zag. And a lot of times they're zagging because that's what the herd's doing, and they're avoiding pain and loss. All right. So know that if you go into those pathways, those dark alleys where there might be some pain involved and there might be the possibility for loss, that you are in an alleyway that not many people are playing in. All right. So that is something that you can understand as an entrepreneur, but just understand your emotions as it pertains to loss aversion. Also, when it comes to marketing and messaging, whatever it is that you're selling as an entrepreneur, a lot of times, a lot of them fail to realize how impactful loss aversion is. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're starting a roofing business, all right? So you're out on a sales call and you're talking to somebody and you're like, oh yeah, this roof's great. It's got a 30-year guarantee. It does this and that. It's made out of these products. This is the price. It's going to look beautiful on your house. You're just going to absolutely love this house. You're kind of talking about the opportunity of gain in that particular situation. Now let's say you're coming up to that person and you're saying, hey, here's the deal. Like, do you need a new roof today? I don't think you do, actually. And I don't know if this roof that you have right now has 5 more years or 5 days. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but it could be even 5 when that torrential downstorm comes through and suddenly you got a trickling waterfall in the center of your house because you got some holes and you got some loose shingles up there. All right. So it's really up to you. I mean, you can pay for it now or you're going to pay for it later, but it's going to be way more expensive when you're getting that new roof on after the problem. Okay. So you can kind of see in these two scenarios, especially if you're playing them in your own mind, like the one where you're talking about the potential of like a waterfall in the middle of your house, it's just like, oh gosh, like, all right, fine, let's get the roof, all right? And now granted, is that as pleasant of a sales experience for the person? No. But if that's what they needed to hear to close the deal because they are going to have issues with that roof, you are doing them a favor. But just understand loss aversion, super powerful thing to understand as an entrepreneur when you're going through those emotional dips, but also when it comes to marketing and messaging your business. All right, let's get to another one. This one is called Exaggerated Expectation. This is the tendency to expect or predict more extreme outcomes than those outcomes that actually happen. So going back to, again, this drawing right here, it's when you're getting started, right? And you're predicting the emotional roller coaster, all right? Just understand that the exaggerated expectation bias is saying that it is the tendency to expect or predict more extreme outcomes than these outcomes that actually happen. As humans, we dramatize things in our minds. Like think about like whatever it is that you want to do in your business or whatever business it is that you want to start. And when you start thinking about the scenarios of what could possibly happen, we exaggerate. Like we're like, I might end up, without a home and I'm going to be in a homeless shelter and like blah, 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 or I'm going to take over the world. Like chances are neither of those things are going to happen. The reality is it's much closer to the middle. So just understand that we tend to dramatize these things. And if you're somebody who focuses on the negative, you're probably dramatizing it in a way that is not very accurate with what's going to happen. All right. Just kind of something you got to believe there, but it's a helpful tip. Now, the last one. Risk compensation is a theory which suggests that people typically adjust their behavior in response to perceived levels of risk and becoming more careful when they sense greater risk and less careful if they feel more protected. So this one's kind of interesting. So basically what it's saying is that when you perceive that there's less risk, you become riskier. And when you perceive there's more risk, you become less riskier. So one of the things you hear from a lot of entrepreneurs when they're thinking about starting this business, right? You're on the emotional roller coaster, is that a lot of entrepreneurs are resilient and they have high risk tolerance. So what we're talking about right now is risk tolerance. So how do you increase that risk tolerance? Well, you have to create a less of a perceived sense of risk around starting a business. So this is really cool. I want to show you something right now. So what I don't want you to do as an entrepreneur is to get so overwhelmed that you start operating from a really bad place. And it's a place that you don't have a lot of leverage or advantages. So what you want to do is use a financial runway calculator like this to figure out the proper amount of emergency fund that you need, which is essentially going to act as your safety net. And again, going back to this, what we call the risk compensation, when you have that safety net, that's what's going to allow you to make the best decisions for your business or allow you to even get started as an entrepreneur. So what you're going to see on the screen right here is a little square that is going to take you to a web page that's going to have a video explaining this financial runway calculator and how you can get this for free for yourself and be able to play around with that. I'm also going to give you some other tools and tips in that video to make your entrepreneurial journey as seamless as possible. All right, guys, I'm going to catch you on that webpage in that next video.